You are watching The Newsmaker, coming to you from the World Web Forum in Zurich, where we're going to sit down with a woman described not only as a force, but also as one of Germany's best-known managers. She is Janina Kugel. Janina, thank you so much for being with us and for being our newsmaker today. It's great to see you in Zurich again.
Happy to be here.
Okay, so we're nearing the end of January, which means we're actually also nearing the end of your tenure with Siemens. You were formerly the CHRO, led up to, upward, close to 400,000 people under you, so quite a feat. What's going through your head as you approach this milestone?
Well, of course, I always say departures from or transitions are always having a lot of different emotions in there, right? There is something that you look forward, which is a new thing. Then, of course, there's things you say to goodbye. And I think it has been a fabulous time. I'm grateful for a lot of experiences. It's great people in that company. And I'm looking forward to the next things to come.
Now, when I looked you up on LinkedIn, I wanted to see what the title situation was, and you did say former CHRO, but you are still the board member.
Yes, I'm still a board member until the end of January, where my contract actually lands. Yeah,
okay.
It's very legally, formally, just like a contractual thing.
Okay.
But I handed over the responsibility that I used to have before for HR and safety and EHS to one of my colleagues who is actually running that now. And I think it's always very good in transitions that also within organizations you have a time when you're handing things over and when you actually then also have the chance to say, it's like, you do it now, if you have a question, come back to me. And I think this is how transitions should also be. It always should be definitely an overlap. And usually it also works well.
Did you have a say in who's going to take over after you at all?
I was offering a wish to the chairman. Obviously, it's a decision of the supervisory board, and they will look for a successor of mine, as far as I'm informed. And Roland, who is currently our CTO and the deputy CEO, is also managing HR for the time being.
And what will you be doing with yourself now? Are you going to take a sabbatical? Are you going to take time off? Do you already have some things that you're looking at? Or?
Well, it's going to be a combination of both. Our children still go to school, which actually leads to a very regular life that you want to do and that you have to do as well. There's a lot of ideas, but I think, and some things that also become a little bit more concrete, but the point is, and that I think is the freedom about transition phases, and obviously in a position like I am, taking the time to think about it. And when you would ask me what and how did I see the world like 12 months ago, and 6 months ago, and 3 months ago, and today, then things are changing. And I believe when you want to break off to something new, you also need to take the time to say, is that really what I want? Or is it something else? And I think that's a wonderful process, and I'm in the middle of it.
Well, I wish you luck with that, and I'm sure you're going to find something that motivates you and moves you forward. And, when I think about when you left, when you announced that you were leaving Siemens 6 months ago, roughly, I mean, it made a lot of noise in the press, and I couldn't help but wonder, if you had been a man, would you have been treated the same way, in the sense that the overriding comment was like a surprise that her contract wasn't renewed?
I generally think that there is so few women in leadership positions that the press usually makes a totally different story out of every woman in a job or not in a job or whatever than about a man, just because it is not as normal, let me call it like that. My wish would be that it wouldn't be really a discussion anymore, and that actually there would be a treatment that would be equally. So, frankly, to your question, I think if I was a man, it wouldn't have been so much noise.
And do you feel like you accomplished what you set out to do?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But the thing is, when you are in any job, right, and you have an aspiration, and you have a strategy, and you have a transformation, and at Siemens we had been setting up the transformation of HR even earlier and before I actually became a board member. So it's a long journey, and the larger the organization is, also you need to be aware is that it takes quite a long time. So we made fabulous moves, and of course that transformation will continue and the journey will continue. The world is changing so much. I mean, VUCA, just like to say something else, geopolitical situations, societal impacts, that I think every company and every organization needs to be in a constant transformation. And so that will continue.
Along those lines, as we think of future generations and all these young people that are going to work, I mean, it's such a different scenario. I mean, we've read reports that say a young person today will change their job 15 to 17 times in their lifetime,
Yeah.
which is already such a transformation in and of itself. I mean, how do you attract and retain this young talent?
It's a different generation, and I think sometimes, just like speaking about stereotypes, the generation of today, they do say things that the baby boomer generation maybe was thinking, but they would never have dared to actually express it and to actually also ask for it. And I think that's a good thing to do. I personally like the discussions. They're not always easy, right? Because there's also demands out there, and they ask for feedback, and they also ask for reasons why. But personally, I believe that every career needs to have a lot of different impacts and a lot of different stations. You just like mentioned, that you also transitioned from one industry to the other, and I think it's a steep learning curve. And personally, I believe that with whatever happens in the world, if we do not continuously learn new things and also look for new challenges, it becomes difficult to master everything. And honestly, personally, I also think it becomes boring. So I'm advocating for that, and depends, like sometimes there's large organizations that offer a lot of different opportunities, but sometimes I also think when you work in one environment, you bring a lot of know-how to another environment, and mingling that is, I think, the beauty of diversity, the beauty of bringing in different backgrounds. It makes it much better, and especially when you're in a global connected world.
No, I hear you. I was thinking back just one moment to our young talent and our young people and how they're becoming more and more outspoken. We're seeing this all over the globe. I mean, especially when it comes to things like climate action, they're demanding that companies really be responsible. They're calling for this, and it makes me wonder, just in the HR field, if companies are really going to have to start training people specifically for these kinds of mitigations.
Yeah, and I think it's company also have to learn that it's not enough to be an attractive employer or to say we offer good jobs, but to be in a constant dialogue. I don't really like that word retention so much, because it means okay, I have to retain people, but to really always keep attractive for people that are in your organization for a longer time. And that means that we need to do it differently. I remember that a manager once said to me is oh, Janina, I mean, a fabulous candidate. And when the person left, the person said to me is I will consider you as an employer. And the manager obviously thought, I mean, if we offer the person a job, then of course the person will join. And that was a new learning. And I was laughing and smiling, because there is, and that's also what we need to understand, the baby boomers were many. It was a generation where a lot of people were happy if they got selected for a job, because there were several hundreds of them applying. Now, at least in the Western world, there is actually the difference that the companies urgently seek for talent. And so that means it's they have to change, and we have to change our systems. I mean, more flexibility, more responsibility, offering different career tracks as well, because that's what is actually demanded.
Absolutely. If I look at Switzerland specifically for a moment, Siemens Switzerland is not a small operation. They have 6,000 people, 2 billion worth turnover, covers many sectors. I mean, did you spend a lot of time here, or?
Oh, well, I mean, Siemens is obviously a very large and global organization. So, I mean, I was regularly in Switzerland, obviously, but also regularly in other countries.
Speaking of which, so in here we look at these surveys by Universum, where they survey young talent, and they ask not only where they would like to work and what would be attractive to them in different employers. So in 2019, Siemens did score well in terms of being number 3 actually among engineering students, behind ABB and Google, as attractive places to work because they perceived as innovative and international. So that was good. But words like in having inspiring leadership and teamwork were not among the top adjectives used to describe the organization. So as the former human resources officer, I mean, is that something that you were conscious of working on?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's when you look at the Universum, for example, surveys from all the different countries, you would also see different situations there. But working on leadership, understanding that leadership means also that we need to change the way they were doing, was something that was very high on my agenda. It's very high on my colleagues' agenda. For example, Cedric, who's responsible also for Switzerland and most of the businesses here. And I think this is very important. There needs to be a continuous change and an understanding for every organization, as well for Siemens as for everyone else, that we need to adapt to the requests that are coming up there from a new generation. Having said that, you also have to always balance that. Get good leadership means is very often you need to manage up to 3 or 4 generations in one team. You have people that are maybe 18 or 19, and you have people that are 60 something. And so definitely you can imagine that that is not the same expectation. So leadership also means, or management also means, that you know what your people need and that you adapt to the different styles.
So if we expand outside of Switzerland and look at our neighboring countries here in Europe, so Austria, Germany, France, Italy, do you see some of the same trends developing?
I think it's always a question which perspective you put in there. If you look at it from a Chinese or from an Indian viewpoint, you would believe that Europe is very similar. Now, if you are living in Europe and you know the differences to some of the countries, and I have the opportunity to live in some of those countries that you just mentioned, then I think we have different challenges. When it comes to future of work, we have to think about, like, is our legislation that we're still having in place the right one? How do those countries adapt the EU legislation to, for example, national legislation, even though Switzerland obviously is not part of the EU? What is the industry looking like? You know, what's our footprint? And I think that will make a total difference. But what is important for me, that the European countries understand that if we want to remain a competitive, powerful, economical part of the world, we need to work together. Because alone, none of the countries will actually make it, because there is a lot of powerful countries coming up in Asia, in North America as well. And I think Europe needs to understand that we need to work together. And I've seen trends where that is kind of like breaking away. So I think if you advocate more, you know, to also really understand and make people understand why it's so important, then I think that would be worthwhile.
Another buzzword that I hear a lot when I have human resources conversations is soft skills. And, you know, I have a colleague who just said to me today, she goes, is that just BS, soft skills, or is that really going to be the skill of the future, communication and such?
Well, you know, of course it's the skill, and it has always been a very, very important skill. The thing about soft skills is it's much more difficult to learn that. So, for example, if you want to learn how to code, you can do that, right? And eventually, some of us are going to be faster or whatever. If you want to learn a new language, that's a skill that you can actually learn. But changing your own behavior, changing your communication style, or, for example, changing the way that you're trying to motivate people, that is what I always like call behavioral change. And that is much more tricky for people. And the older you get, the more difficult it becomes. Will it be essential? Yes. Has it always been essential? Yes. Because people join a company and then they want to work in a team for a manager, with a manager that they are really enjoying, right? And we all know that. If you like to go to work every day, whatever you do, then you will bring much better results than if you go there and say, I really don't feel like going there.
Because one thing that you've brought up, and more than once I've heard you say this, that there are differences between managers and leaders.
Oh, absolutely.
They're not the same.
No, I mean, management means is like you have tasks and you have activities and you do that and you fulfill the goals and all of that. And of course, leaders need to manage that as well. But leading for me is also giving a visionary thinking, giving a clear imagination where you want to head. And that is more than just like managing tasks. And that should not be mistaken. Very often in the common language, you know, we speak about leadership, but very frankly, I think there is few leaders in the world and a lot of managers.
And what about this concept? I heard this at one of the panels here at the World Web Forum. What about this concept of fluid authority? Does that work?
It does work, and it's actually quite difficult. So fluid authority means that once in a while, you have to take a decision. So imagine you are the manager of a team. There's a discussion about which way to go. And of course, there are conflicting interests and different ideas. Eventually, someone needs to make a call. If the team members cannot agree, then it needs to be the boss that actually takes a decision. On the other hand, you also need to learn that sometimes the results are much better if you let those decide that are the experts and you're not taking the decision. So that's fluid. So you pretty much like have different roles. And when I'm speaking about leadership, I very often say is like, it's not only about being the boss. Sometimes you're the mentor, sometimes you're the mentee, sometimes you are a peer, sometimes you are whatever, right? I mean, there is different roles, and that is fluid. Is it easy? No. But is it something worthwhile learning? I think so.
And it's rather new. I mean, this is a
I think it's new that we're speaking about it, but I think when you look back like 30, 40 years about like what you or whom would you have been considering as a great leader, most probably these people did exactly that.
we just didn't call it that.
Because how do you want to generate followership if you don't give freedom to people? How do you want to make people responsible for something if you don't give them the space to develop their own ideas? So I think you always have to balance that very clearly.
I always wonder, as an HR manager, how do you quantify these skills and these transformations and these leadership changes? I mean, when you have to sit down with your board and say, I'm going to put a number on this, how do you do that?
Well, you know, some things are quantifiable. You can count certain things, right? But you can also measure them. I mean, you just like mentioned surveys. I mean, most companies do regular surveys or pulse checks of like asking their employees, where are we heading to? Are we actually getting better in whatever you wanted to aspire? So I think that is measurable. But sometimes certain behavioral changes need longer until you can actually feel how it becomes. And of course, sometimes I wish we would actually have the chance to say, this is a situation and we did it like this. What would have happened if we had a totally different team? So that's of course like fiction, and we can actually never do that. But I believe you also need to understand that not every human behavior can be measurable. Human beings are not numbers, and you need to live with that.
You just had a birthday, a bit of a milestone for most people.
Yes, 50.
The big 5-0. What is that like? And I mean, what are you, if you take stock, where are you?
You know, the funny thing is, like, a friend of mine said, is like, it's the 2020s, right? The dancing 20s or whatever, comes up there as headlines, and you turn 50, like it's a decade or whatever. I hadn't been thinking about that, even though it would have been an easy calculation to do. Honestly, I don't think that age matters. Do I have more gray hair than 10 years back? Of course. Does that matter? No, right? I mean, there is a lot of experience that I made. I'm very happy that I don't have to take the same decisions anymore than I had to take when I was 30. But I think it also makes you wiser. And you need to figure out what you want. And I think the older you get and the more you succeeded and the more you achieved, and the more you also know where you failed and the more that you know where you're good at, the easier some of the decisions get. So I'm happy about that, and I don't think that, age matters. It's more, my children that might be criticizing me and telling me, Mom, you're middle-aged, right? Or if I don't understand the language anymore that is actually used. But I'm trying to keep up with that, and I'm trying to be cool, but I can tell you I'm totally uncool. At least that's their judgment.
And what are you saying to them about leadership, their future, what to look for, how to deal with what's coming?
It was actually funny because we had friends over, and they brought their children along, and then I overheard the teenagers' conversations when my son said, actually, I'm a feminist. And, I obviously stopped and listened, and he said, there need to be equal chances for everyone. Whether you're a woman or a man or transgender, it doesn't really matter. And everyone was agreeing, okay? And that made me totally proud, to see that they are defining the way of interaction in a different way than most probably we did when we were in that age, because the discussions didn't really happen. And what I want them is to understand that every human being is whoever they are, and that they have a choice. And my wish would always be that the world would allow equal opportunities for everyone, independent from your gender, independent from your ethnicity or cultural background. I know that we are not yet there, but I think it's worthwhile to do everything to get there.
And for the record, I would have asked a man the same questions.
Good that you're saying that.
Thank you so much, Janina, for your time.
Thank you.
It was a real
pleasure.
pleasure. And good luck.
Thank you.